So what I'm going to do is basically tell you the story of Auckland, which will only be my perspective, of course, but just in terms of how we got to where we are. And just a quick geography refresher for those of you who perhaps aren't too sure. That is New Zealand on the left, South and North Island. Auckland is just here towards the north. This is a blow up on it. As you can see, it's a very estuarine and coastal environment. Very long, skinny, from an economic efficiency point of view, an extremely inefficient S-shape city, which really is difficult. The red is the urban area, and then the rest is what we kind of call rural. It's probably rural in some regards to a certain degree, but it's certainly not part of the productive farming industry of New Zealand anymore. So that's one way to look at it. And when I was coming over and I was thinking about how can I explain to you, well, what's it really like to be there? So for a start, here are some numbers. Paradoxically, Auckland is 34% of New Zealand's total GDP, so it's one of the few sort of primate cities in the world which occupies such a significant place in the national economy, which is a plus and a minus depending on whether you're inside or outside of Auckland. When we look at the economic challenges for New Zealand as a whole, there's been some work done recently that says in order to meet our bigger economic goals, which crudely described our catch-up with Australia, that we'll need something in the order of $180 billion of foreign direct investment over the next 10 to 15 years. About $90 billion of that is going to have to come into Auckland. So you get a feel again for the scale of the challenge in front of us. 78.5 billion is the GDP of Auckland, roughly measured. 18.6 billion is how much money central government puts into Auckland every year, as best as we can calculate it. And $3.2 billion is the annual operating budget of my organisation, the Auckland Council. It makes it about the second or third biggest organisation in New Zealand in terms of balance sheet. 717,000 is the number of employees in Auckland. 7,005 is the number of Auckland Council employees. 56,000 is the number of unemployed in Auckland, roughly. 23,000 is the number of youth between 18 and 24 unemployed, and that is not a big number, and that's quite advantageous in a sense because, as one of our ministers says, we actually know where these people live, and so we can actually tailor our services to suit. 642,000 is the number of small to medium enterprises in Auckland, and the average number of employees is 4, and 1 is me. But put another way, what's it like to be there? Well, I mean, I can look out the window here and be in this almost unbelievable environment, which is uniquely you and uniquely London. What's it like to be in Auckland? Well, this is my daughter, and this is on a beach which is about 30 minutes boat trip from the CBD, which you can just see in the background there. And that was a last spur-of-the-moment decision Saturday before last to head out and go up for a barbecue on the beach. So we don't have the big economy, we don't have the big infrastructure and the amazing architecture necessarily, but we have our own architecture and our own competitive advantages, as you can see, plus bratty little girls who like cameras. So yeah, it's not a bad place to live. I thought I'd just start the story by showing you, this is an old picture, but basically this is the central city coastline here. Down here is the Manukau Harbour, which is our other harbour, and this is the main, what we call the isthmus, the main historical part of the city in there. Those are the tram lines that existed across Auckland until about 1956. Today, not one. Oh, actually, that's not quite true. Where is it? That little bit there exists as a tourist tram line, and that's it. They were entirely ripped out in the 1950s, and I'll explain to you why, and that will tell you why we're in such a muddle. So that's Queen Street, Lower Queen Street, in about the 1950s, just before they went, and as you can see, they were a significant part of public transport at that time, around about 100 million passenger trips per year, for a population of about 500,000, so there was a significant mode of transport. But about that time, of course, the car started to turn up, and this was a famous photo which sort of was the straw that broke the camel's back. It proved that the trams were getting in the way of the cars and the buses. And so the decision was made, most regretfully, that the trams had to go. Once the trams went, then the cars took the place, of course, and then we entered in the 1950s into a great motorway building boom, which we are almost just finishing now, I have to say. So this is just a couple of shots. This is the Auckland Harbour Bridge, which connected the central area to the North Shore, which is up there. Basically brought into play a massive area of land and created an enormous commuter suburb. Opened in 1959, was so good that within 10 years they had to put 2 more lanes on either side of it. The central city here, you can see a lot of the historical areas of the central city were basically just razed and turned into a massive motorway network. So much so that when you look at it now, it is what we rather unaffectionately call the concrete collar. So it basically encircles the city, and people like Ludo have been rather influential in pointing out to us that this absolutely severs Auckland from its city and is almost like a moat, but of a less friendly nature. And so one of the big things we're trying to do now is to figure out how do we actually make this a little bit more permeable and allow people to get back into and reclaim their city. So that motorway, there's a shot there in 1956, I think it was, the first motorway section, and this is almost the same section just a year or so ago, and of course, you build the roads and people fill them up, and so over that time we have reached a bit of a transport crisis. At the same time, investment, the trams went, investment in rail was practically non-existent, buses were corporatised and run down, and we basically got to a point where the place was grinding to a little bit of a halt. The other thing that really, and so that's kind of a rough history of the 1950s through to the 1990s or the early 2000s. This magnificent picture here was really where it all happened. In 2006, I guess it was, New Zealand won the right to host the Rugby World Cup, which, in our land is about the greatest thing that could ever possibly happen. Winning it was the next greatest thing, but we won't talk about that. And there was great teeth gnashing and consternation about the state of our stadia, which are, fairly much 1950s, 1960s pieces of infrastructure, really run down, patched together. And so the Minister of Sport of the time, a chap called Trevor Mallard, so this is right sort of in the peak of the last economic cycle, said to Auckland, I will build for you at a cost of around about just under $1 billion a waterfront stadium. All you have to do is say yes. That's it. It's an unconditional deal. Now, at this time in Auckland, there were seven local authorities of various sizes and a regional council. They could not agree. They basically fought and scrapped amongst each other, fought over the location. The port that you can see, which is actually right in the centre of our city, is owned by one of the councils, and that sort of created a tremendous conflict of interest. So Auckland basically messed around, and the government said, that's it, we've had a gutsful. And so they established a Royal Commission of Inquiry into governance in Auckland pretty much on the back of this, as the perfect piece of evidence that this place cannot make decisions, cannot get on and do. So I won't go into the process of the Royal Commission. It's fairly standard, but the Royal Commission did report back to, that's Peter Salmon on the left, who was the chairman of the Royal Commission, reporting to the Governor-General in 2009, and the document that they produced is on the table there. And what they basically said was that there are too many councils in Auckland, too many decision makers, not enough clarity, no single leader for Auckland, and no direction for Auckland. And that's about 3,000 pages to say that. And we all knew that. What they suggested, strangely though, was that there should be one sort of metro council for the whole region, which there already was, but it was basically an EPA and a transport monitoring authority. And then there should be 4 larger city councils beneath. Now, as far as I think we could all tell, that was a result of those previous mayors all jockeying and trading between each other and who wanted to keep a job and what might it be. And I'm not saying that an officer of a Royal Commission would be so easily influenced, but it seemed kind of strange as a radical change to go from 7+1 to 4+1. It just didn't seem to make any sense for a city of 1 and a bit million people. So the government of the time said, well, that's really interesting, but that's not good enough. We're going to have one council. That's it, one council. And so that is what they did. But there are a few complications. Now, the other thing I should say is, so the government decided, yes, there's going to be one council, and it's going to have a mayor whose powers I'll describe shortly, and it's going to be focused on development and growth of Auckland. at about that time, and I'm not going on about the rugby for any particular reason, but the Rugby World Cup did indeed happen. Eden Park, which was the original venue, got reasonably well upgraded, and it was a bit of another turning moment in Auckland's history, rather like I imagine the London Olympics might have been for London. It brought the whole city together, and the phrase that Prime Minister Down used in New Zealand was a stadium of 4 million people, which was quite neat, and it really did bring us all together. And so there's the skyline, and we did a whole lot of work on the waterfront. We redid the stadium, as you can see. A lot of other public works. The transport system was improved in time for it, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it put us at a really positive space because we had this really good feel about ourselves as a city, and we had a new mayor, or a new council, pardon me, coming on board to take the reins. So I said there was one council, but that's not quite true. So this is the Auckland region. So the city area I showed you is just in there. The Auckland region is around about 500,000 square kilometres. I think that's right. Of land, and it also encompasses large areas of ocean out both sides. The decision was made, however, that there needed to be a local voice in this massive regional machinery, and that a local perspective was absolutely essential. So the decision was made to create what we called local boards, and there's 21 of these which are shown there. And they have roles related to community events, community facilities, local parks, and some local economic development. But that's about it. The majority of functions are held by what we call the governing body, which covers the entire region and is made up of 20 elected representatives plus a mayor who is elected at large from across the whole region. So in our first election, Len Brown was a candidate and became the mayor for all of Auckland, and that is a phrase that he still uses. Rather similar to some other mayors that you might know, a very big personality, very, very ambitious, very, very good at working with people from any side of the political spectrum, and absolutely unceasing in his energy. So what are the mayor's responsibilities? Now, this is where I think, what frustrates you in the UK and what frustrates us in New Zealand, don't think that we've got this right, we've got this special, because I think when you look at this as a list of responsibilities, in some ways it's relatively modest. So promoting a vision for Auckland, which for Len was to be the world's most livable city, providing leadership to achieve that. Now, both of those things are really just qualitative powers, if you like, in terms of embodied into the role of the Mayor of Auckland. He does have a significant role in leading the development of council plans, policies and budgets. So our spatial plan, our 10-year financial plan, our annual plan and our town planning document, if I can call it that, are all proposed by the Mayor and put to the council and then to the community. But it is the council and the community who make the decisions on them and engaging with Auckland. He also then has responsibility for appointing a deputy, determining the governance structure of the council and appointing the committee chairs. And he also has an office, but to give you some sense on the modesty of that office, it has a budget of about $7 million per year and mainly is used in a reasonably ad hoc fashion for commissioning certain pieces of work in relation to the Mayor's priorities. So there's not a huge transfer of executive power to the Mayor in the way that perhaps some other cities have gone about doing that. One of the key things, though, and sorry, there's just a couple of word-dense slides here, was that the legislation that created the Auckland Council required the development of a spatial plan. And that was as a result of the Royal Commission process, which looked very broadly and widely across the world at successful international cities, and there seemed to be a common theme of the development of a spatial plan, a long-term spatial plan for those cities. So I'm not going to read all of that out. Those are the legislative requirements, and I think, Andrew, we can make this presentation available to everybody. As you can see, it's something that we have to do. We had no choice about it. It has a broad sort of sustainability remit there in terms of what it needs to do. It has to be for a time frame of 20 to 30 years, and it has to do all of those things and some more over the page. Unfortunately, however, The legislation that this was written under is not the same legislation as all our other planning and resource management legislation was written under. So these two things kind of float in space a little bit. And so what that means is there is not a clear hierarchy from national down to local, down to decisions. So we have national policy statements that the government sets some. We have the spatial plan, but that is not approved by the government. And a cynic might say that that is a deliberate decision so that the government does not have to commit to what's in the spatial plan. And then the council itself must have regard to its own spatial plan when it does subsidiary planning decisions, but it doesn't have to give effect to it or implement it in a literal sense. That really is dependent upon the political leadership of the mayor as to the extent to which he is able to carry that. So, those are a few weaknesses there. Just some more detail, again I won't read through, but what you can see is that it does require us to put Auckland in the context of the whole of New Zealand, show how infrastructure is going to be sequenced. It has to have an evidential base, future location of development, and identifying nationally and regionally significant recreation, ecological and landscape areas. So the legislation was quite prescriptive about that. So our first Auckland plan, which was released a couple of years ago, just quickly, the way it works is the vision, the mayor's vision, the world's most livable city. We set out a series of outcomes of what we think that looks like in 2040. I won't read them all out. This is probably the most important one, that we identified what we call these transformational shifts. These are the things that we feel there needs to be some radical movement on. Otherwise, Auckland is never ever going to get to that measure up the top. Now, depending on whose measurement you use, we ain't doing too badly on that one. If you use Mercer, we're third. If you use The Economist, we're 10th. Monocle, we're about 10th. The problem is Auckland's a pretty city because of its natural attributes and geography and climate, but its built environment is the thing that lets it down. So these are written in no particular order, although the mayor was very, very strong on the prospects for Auckland's children and young people. Part of the reason for that was because he was largely elected by those parts of Auckland which are less affluent and younger and browner than the rest of Auckland, so that is something he really, really feels strongly about. The public transport with one network is a big, big one, and the quality of urban living as well. Where we've got to now is to say that those two there, the outstanding public transport and the improve the quality of urban living, are the two big ones that the mayor and the council think are going to make the greatest difference. So I'm just going to take a risk here and play you a brief video, if this will let me, which shows you just a little bit more, tells you a little bit more about the Auckland plan and saves me yelling. Sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the things I've noticed there, it's all the same things.
Oh, yeah.
That's no longer true, by the way, it's about 2 years ago. Okay, there would have been a few things in there that probably chimed with you guys, eh? One of the interesting ironies there, you saw that transport target of, what was it, 70 million at the moment, I think, and 120 million. Remember I said we were doing 100 million 70 years ago, 60 years ago. So it's getting back to the future of, back to the past. So the legislation required a development strategy, and this is visually what it looks like. As the video showed, we have this interesting sort of arithmetic paradox of 70-40, where we said we'll get 70% of the future growth inside the urban area, which is the sort of the salmon-y coloured area in the middle, and up to 40% outside. So there's a sort of a 10% slip in there either way. That's a big change from previous regional strategies, which we're pretty much 100% inside the urban limit. Now, we moved away from that, partly for political reasons, because it was tremendously difficult to maintain that and was basically just creeping out in an ad hoc fashion, but also for economic reasons. It's a binding constraint, and some analysis showed that land prices immediately inside that line were 10 times what they were immediately outside. So it was really distorting the land market quite badly. So what we did was we said, okay, we'll identify where some of these new urban development areas will be, which are the areas with the question marks. So they were in the south, and the west, and the north, and we're just doing some work now to identify the sequencing and timing and infrastructure needs for that development. Two big priorities you saw in the video: the city centre and the southern initiative, which is the area of most severe deprivation in Auckland and probably in New Zealand. Paradoxically, it's where the most jobs are in Auckland and New Zealand as well, but they just tend to be taken by people who don't live in the area. And so it's sort of the area of most intense manufacturing and industry in Auckland as well. The purple dots are what we call our metropolitan centres. So we have a hierarchy from the city centre, metropolitan centres, town centres, and then satellite towns. We've got one in the far north, one in the far south, where we'll eventually increase the population as well. So this really was trying as much as we could to make this spatially intelligent. The funny shades on this was something that actually took a lot of debate, because when we first did this work, we said, well, we've got to find a place for 400,000 people. And our data people said you can get them all in the existing urban area. No trouble at all, no trouble at all. Technically you can do that. And then we got some people in from the property sector, and they said, you've got a few problems here. For a start, the turnover rate for property is only, properties only turn over on average once every 4 years or 5 years, I think it is, something like that. And secondly, not all parts of the city are equal, of course, in terms of attractiveness. So what we started to do in this diagram was indicate the darker the salmon-y colour, the more market attractive it would be, and the lighter it is, the less market attractive. And that led us to realise that we had this target that we couldn't reach, that there was no way in an open market that you could get that many houses into that area over that period of time, simply because of the way that the market works. So I could talk about that forever, but I won't. Just the second major strategy we did, which is my work, was the economic development strategy. Some of the things were mentioned in there. We do have these three big economic targets, which roughly represent a doubling of our performance as it was in around about 2010. They are very, very demanding, because Auckland, as is most cities, is a service city. It is not that strong in terms of having an export industry itself, but we are trying to change that, leading to changes in GDP and ultimately productivity growth. Now, strangely enough, actually, we're going at about 3.5% per year on the productivity growth at the moment, but I think that's just people better utilising assets, sweating assets, still as a result of GFC and not being that willing to create new capacity necessarily. I'm not going to focus on that. Now, I've just got some statistics here to let you know how it's gone, and I won't dwell on these too long. This is actually a little bit out of date now, it's about a year old, but it's just an interesting thing that we've sort of noted in terms of Auckland and New Zealand's relative performance against the rest of the world. I suspect Britain's doing a bit better than that now, but you can see that, interestingly, New Zealand has weathered the recession reasonably well. Compared to a lot of other countries. We never had to institute any real austerity measures in New Zealand. If anything, there was a sort of a Keynesian stimulus process that went on in New Zealand in terms of bank guarantees and employer guarantees and underwriting. and infrastructure development, which tended to see off the worst of it. So even though our growth rate is not spectacular, it's about what it has been on average for the last 30 years, and our Reserve Bank doesn't really want to see it get much faster than that because it'll just put pressure in terms of capacity and interest rates and inflation. So we're reasonably happy at around that level. Just to show you how New Zealand is a sort of a place of many parts, you would have heard of the Canterbury earthquake. You might have heard of the Canterbury earthquake. That really had a big impact on the New Zealand economy. Of course, though, when you destroy an entire city, what you create is a huge economic stimulus. And so now what we've got, Canterbury's in the blue. You can see that the first Canterbury earthquake was around about here. And since then, Canterbury, in terms of GDP growth, has actually been charging ahead of the rest of New Zealand, which is in the white, and Auckland is in the green. Auckland tends to do worse during the recessions and slightly better during the good times, which I think is probably symptomatic of most cities. Unemployment rate, there again, Auckland, the rest of New Zealand. Auckland has done a little bit worse than the rest of New Zealand and still does a little bit worse, and that's because of our high youth population. And you can see there youth unemployment has been a real worry to people. The green is the 15 to 19-year-olds, and the blue is the 20 to 24-year-olds. The 15 to 19 is up around 35% at the deepest part of the recession, and it's been very difficult to move that number. It's coming down slowly, but it is a real problem in terms of intergenerational unemployment. The simple takeout of this graph is that Auckland takes half of all migration to New Zealand, and something like 70% of all migrants that come to New Zealand ultimately stay in New Zealand over time, and it really is a major part of our population growth, increasingly so as the population ages and the natural increase rate reduces. So we absolutely require and rely on migration to keep our growth going. House prices, like here in the UK, have been a source of great frustration in New Zealand and in Auckland in particular. These are real median house prices, and you can see Auckland in the red, basically lifted away from the rest of New Zealand around about 2010, 2011. The rest of New Zealand in real terms has actually gone down. Canterbury has gone up mainly due to a supply shortage, a severe supply shortage. Auckland has just kept on rocketing away. The median house price in Auckland now is about $800,000. But we are starting to see quite some activity in the economy. This is a measure of our residential building consent applications, and you can see it came off a low during the GFC of around about 3,000. I think that was shown in the video. Now it's around about 7,000, so there's a definite surge in house building, partly brought on by some special legislation that was agreed to between central government and the Auckland Council to fast-track housing development areas, what they call special housing areas, where pretty much you get consent to develop housing in those areas in around about 3 months, and typically in the past it could take you 3 years or longer. And so it's a very supply-side driven initiative. It's just consenting the land. It doesn't automatically build the houses, and the building industry we're finding is not that responsive to that stimulus. Much like what I've heard about the UK building industry, we've got 1 or 2 players of some reasonable scale, and then dozens of almost artisan builders who are not able to gear themselves up very quickly to respond to that. Now, one of the things that we have done, and the governance reform really brought it to our attention, is to realise that the competition is not other cities in New Zealand. As much as we loved to eat each other to bits and beat each other up, especially from the South Island or North Island or Wellington or Auckland, that is not the competition. Similarly also, London and New York are not the competition because they are way beyond the scale of Auckland. There is no real sensible point of comparison in doing that. And I think for a long time, I mean when I came to the job, when I became economic development manager, my boss said, "Harvey, I want Auckland to be one of the top 10 cities in the world on GDP per capita." I said, "No, it's just we're 1 million people. It's just scale means that's absolutely impossible." So what we've done is tried to better target those cities where we think we can both learn from and those who we are likely to be competing for in terms of talent and capital and skills and imagination and ideas. And there they are there. And so we're starting to move our international engagement program much towards those kind of cities rather than towards the traditional what we called sister cities, sort of the Eisenhower post-World War II handshaking, gift exchanging types of cities. And that's starting to actually take off now. We've just signed a economic tripartite alliance between Los Angeles, who I don't actually think is on, I'm going to give two that aren't on this list, Los Angeles and Guangzhou. So instead of a sort of a bilateral relationship, sort of one-to-one, we're trying to get some relationships that actually start to stitch up the Pacific Rim and put ourselves in a stronger position in that regard. That basically just describes why we've chosen those cities. That's because of their size, their livability, their diverse economies, and we've started to look at how each of those cities ranks globally and what we can learn from each of those. And Greg's been a major part of the benchmarking process for us there and learning from those other cities. Those are the things that unite us, as I hope the photo at the beginning showed. So we're trying to identify with those cities who are also competing on the same things so that we can actually compete internationally and start to win. So we think that we've had the first cycle of city building in terms of the new governance framework for Auckland. It was about putting our city into a national and international context, which we hadn't really done that well before. Building the role of the city as a mayor, as a champion of the economy and of the business offer to the rest of the world. Focusing very much on physical projects like the Rugby World Cup and the stadiums and tourism promotion and building the brand, the Black Book, and getting our message out to the rest of the world as to what we are. We have created a lead agency for economic development, which is where Patrick McVeigh is working, and that has really taken us ahead leaps and bounds, especially in the tourism and major events space. We're now the voted the second or third best city in the world for events. A couple of years ago it was behind a place called London, don't know why. And usually it's behind a place called Melbourne, do know why. But we're doing okay there. Aligning city government functions around economic development agenda. As I said, the mayor has had a very strong focus on growth. I have to say, culturally in New Zealand, that's a really hard sell. New Zealanders, kind of like the native Kiwis themselves, sort of are quite comfy, don't really run when chased, are kind of a bit of an evolutionary oddity. Yes, that's right. And so growth and success and wealth and prosperity is something that a lot of people shudder about in New Zealand. They kind of go, no, that's not the Kiwi way, it's not what we do here. But we're the only city of scale in New Zealand, and we're only 1.5 million people. We have to succeed, and one of the things we've worked really hard on with the rest of New Zealand is to say, if we succeed, you succeed. So help us to succeed. And we've begged and borrowed ideas like core cities from the UK to help us work with our other cities around New Zealand to understand that and see how we can make connections with them a lot better. Supporting foreign and direct investment and talent attraction, trade promotion I've spoken about, and the visitor brand. So it was all about policies, projects, and promotion. So what now? Well, strategy is done. We've done the video, we've done the 400-page book. It's very easy to get to that point in a sense because I suspect many of these strategies look more or less the same. I suspect most of the strategic issues around cities around the world are more or less the same. But now we have to move into that tricky space of what do you do? And that's where the politics becomes really quite demanding. It's one thing to be a mayor who sets a big vision on a 30-year time frame because you're not likely to be held too hard to account in the first 1, 2, 3 years of that. But we're realising now there's no point just sitting there and then probably doing what we've often done in the past, which is waiting about 6 years and then writing a new strategy. We've actually got to do something. We've actually got to do something about that urban form. We've actually got to do something about those transport issues and do something about the prospects for youth. So in an economic sense, we talk about the second cycle now, and we see this as where the value proposition of the executive mayor and the single council really starts to come into play, because this is the kind of stuff you can't do when you've got 7 or 8 authorities all competing with each other and representing only about 250,000 people each. You just can't do that. So it's kind of the evolution of everything I've already said, the global focus, positioning of economic development within the government. So, getting the government in New Zealand, which, is down in Wellington, 500 kilometres away from us, to recognise and agree and support the idea that Auckland is an economic powerhouse of New Zealand, proactive business leadership, the brand, infrastructure, kickstarting the enterprise economy, the global cultural offer, and better understanding the role of education and universities in Auckland. Investment, collaboration, getting the growth management issues right, and so integrating, incentivising, influencing, implementing, and making that shift. Now, I'm not going to focus on that. I just want to quickly show you a few of the key projects and talk about the challenges that we've had. You saw the City Rail Link in that diagram. Now, this is our flogged version of the tube map, and it gives you an idea of how modest our rail network is. Ours is an overground heavy rail network that was started around about 100 years ago. In the 1990s, it was practically dead. The government who owns the rail corridor pretty much said, look, we're going to sell this land off. There's no one getting on these trains. Everyone's driving cars. Can't you see it? And they were ready to pull the plug. Now, fortunately, the regional leaders of the time fought really hard against that. And you won't believe this, but what they did was they went to a train museum in Perth, bought some old trains, lick of paint, old diesel things, lick of paint, new seats, put them on the line, and what do you know? People use them. Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. And so the next thing we did was, and I'll show you a photo soon, there's an old, the City Rail terminus has always been down the bottom end of the city, but it pretty much disappeared in the 90s. It was about to be bowled over. And so we reclaimed the old central post office and built a underground rail terminus underneath it, which really started to act as a focal point. I mean, it's nothing like St Pancras or anything like that. It's like a corner of St Pancras, but it really started to give people a sense that you can actually have a reasonably comfortable experience on trains. The problem was the trains come into this and then have to back out to get out. It's not a through flight terminus, so that halves the capacity of the system. So what we said was, well, if we actually connected all of that up, we'd double the performance of the rail network. So what we're proposing right now is what's called the City Rail Link, which goes from the Britomart station I just described, underneath the main part of the city, right back out to the other side of the city, past the concrete corridor, and links the whole thing up and gets it working. It's the kind of thing you guys do every other day, but for us it's a big deal. It's about $2.4 billion, hugely controversial. The government doesn't want to do it. The rules of the game in New Zealand are pretty much any major transport infrastructure, the government is up for half of that. So they're holding out on this and saying there's not a business case because there's not enough employment growth, there's not enough of this, not enough of that. And we're saying, but if we built this, we would actually get that. And so we're in this frustrating chicken and egg situation. This gives you the example of the performance, the network performance improvements. It also gives you a sense of speed, relative speed in Auckland. Just to give you an example, where are we? Newland or Mount Albert, at the moment, it's about 12 kilometres from the city. It takes you 40 to 50 minutes on a train. You know, you could speed walk just that fast. Now, when the City Rail Link comes on board, what did I just do? About 10 to 20 minutes, which actually brings it into the realm of feasible for people. So the speeds are not tremendous, but the gains in terms of connectivity are going to be quite significant. So that's our big project. If you would just, there we go. That's the Britomart rail terminus with one of the new trains in it. It was, when it was built, the world's only, I think, operating underground diesel rail station because we didn't have any electric trains. And so the diesels used to come in here, and these things are actually they're architectural elements meant to represent volcanic cones, but they're also sneaky ducks that suck all the stuff away. There's my two kids there, proudly in front of the first electric train when it came in earlier in the year. So once we had that infrastructure, things really started to happen. That's the outside, the central post office, which was an A-grade heritage building. So once we got that going, really people started to get an idea that perhaps public transport and rail transport in Auckland could work. Now, these are some of the other achievements in the last 4 years of the Auckland Council. So there's the Britomart rail station. This is behind the rail station. It's a big heritage precinct, which we went into a long-term development partnership with a property owner, and they've restored all the heritage buildings, created new commercial spaces. That's one of the new commercial spaces up in the top right, and really brought that part of the city to life. A lot of work thanks to Ludo on shared spaces, which was a completely alien concept to us about 6 years ago. Restoring public places. This used to be a vehicular street with curbs and channels, Elliott Street. Taking that away, allowing the people and the cars to negotiate their own way through, slowing the thing down. And what we've found in streets like this, the retail spend has gone up about 400%. So we're trying to do a hang of a lot of that through our city centre now, only really limited by capital. So electrification, our rail network was diesel, and we just finished this year electrification of the entire network. The government initially offered to pay for that, and then decided that they would actually just lend us the money to do it and we'd have to pay them back, which was very generous, but at least we got it done. The new rolling stock has just been rolled out now. This is Newmarket train station, so basically all those metropolitan centres that I mentioned to you now have decent train stations, and that is starting to lead to the kind of higher density development that you can see in the background of that one there. So literally build it and they are coming. Transport, as I said, we started our motorway network 50 years ago. This is what's called the Waterview Tunnel. It's the largest tunnel in Australasia, 14 metre width. It will finally link the whole network together and give a second route around Auckland. It's kind of like your M25. It gets everyone, instead of going straight through the city centre, so that will be open in a couple of years, and that's it. Our motorway network is done. There's no real ambition to do any more motorway development in Auckland because we'll just be destroying valuable land to do it. The waterfront is probably one of the jewels in our crown. It was a industrial waterfront, a port waterfront, up until about 20 years ago. We've been gradually moving the port. This is west, and so we'll be moving the port to the east. You can see the cranes in the background. This is the main area of Viaduct Harbour. This is when we won the America's Cup in 2000. This is called North Wharf, and that wharf there is just that wharf there. You can see we've actually put a massive playground right in the centre of our city. And once again, it's one of those things, the planners and scientists have great doubt, but you build it and they have come. Nearly there. Where we are now is that we've done this stuff, but if you look at our 30-year plan and you look at the transport infrastructure requirements needed for that, just to keep congestion at about the level that it is now and provide a reasonable operating public transport system, we are around about $12 billion short in our budget, around about $400 million a year. So the government's response to that has been, well, you have to prove that there's a problem. And our response has been, well, let's find an imaginative way to actually find a solution to this. So we've done a whole lot of work across the business, public sector, not-for-profits, community organisations. The government stayed out of that process, but we've produced a report on Auckland's future transport funding. Two alternatives that we're looking at: a regional fuel tax, plus increased property taxes, or a network congestion charge. And the general consensus is towards the latter, not only because it's a little bit more efficient to collect, but also because it's a demand signal. And that if you take something like the Singapore system where you can actually vary the charge according to the congestion, you can actually start to drive down demand for your system. So that's kind of a run through of where we've got to. I've tried to focus a little bit on some of the physical things. Where I want to sort of end is on, well, at the end of the day, leadership is the big thing. And I think, like in any city, the leadership of your mayor is absolutely essential. And there's just a few things I've tried to capture here in terms of Len Brown. He does have a fantastic relationship with the Prime Minister. They're from opposite sides of the political fence, but there is a respect there. The Prime Minister, about a year and a half ago, actually agreed to fund the City Rail Link. It's just a question of when, not if now. So there's arguments about timing, but not whether it's going to happen. As you can see from the thumbs up, he is an extraordinarily positive gentleman and really gets out there. That's him on the first electric train there, just about beside himself. But he really does champion Auckland to Aucklanders, for Aucklanders, with Aucklanders, and to the rest of the world. When you go on international trade missions with Len, you don't sleep. He just goes the whole time. Unfortunately, though, like any major public figure, from time to time things happen. And our mayor had his own speed bump about 14 months ago. Won't go into the detail, but let's say that his wife wasn't that pleased with what he was up to. And unfortunately, that really put a damper on his reputation, and that has led to a slowing of the pace of change, because his political opponents have started to use that lack of mana and mandate as a reason to question things which 12, 18, 2 years ago they were going along with. And that's the unfortunate reality of politics, isn't it? So, last slide, I think. The ongoing challenges, the pace and speed of growth. We're mainly a property rates funded organisation, and we collect around about, out of the $3.2 billion every year, we collect about $1.2 billion in rates. We do 10-year financial plans, and our last 10-year financial plan had that increasing by 4.9% every year for the next 10 years. It's always something 0.9%, isn't it? 5% every 10 years. And the community was okay with that. They saw that as reasonable because they understood what they were going to get for it in terms of the improvements in infrastructure and transport. Since the Mayor's speed bump, he's lost that mandate. He's now suggesting a rate increase of 2.5%. What that has meant is that the pace and rate of growth in terms of the improvement has had to slow down dramatically. And we're right in the middle of that debate right now. Central versus local. We've got a very different system in a lot of ways to you guys. Central government is the main provider of health, education, fire, hospitals, all social services, so on. Local councils are pretty much, we used to be called roads, rates and rubbish. It's pretty much the city civic services and transport and parks on top of that. So central government is a huge lever on what we can and cannot do. The governing body versus the local boards, as I said, the 21 local boards, huge tension there between those 21 local boards. There's around about 160 local board members. And so there's this constant tension between the local interests and the regional interests and the national interests. And the local boards don't think they've got enough power. The governing body think that they've got too much. And there's a constant debate there. Rates versus debt and alternatives I've already mentioned. We use property value as a proxy for value for money. So, in Auckland in the last 3 years, property values have gone up more than 50% on average. And so that's really hitting people quite hard. Affordability of the rates rises. As I said, the relationship between the Mayor, converting the 30-year strategy into concrete funded actions. What I call the strategy trap, as I said, easy to write, hard to do. And that's where we are right now. Urban development in Auckland, an endless debate about up versus out, high versus low, density versus no density, heritage, and so on. And what we've actually found is that if you look at the intentions of the Auckland plan in terms of the 400,000 people, and then you look at what has been publicly agreed in our town planning documents, the two just don't match. Because every time we've tried to do that, it's got bargained away in terms of heritage or height or density, those kind of things. So it's a very difficult space. Infrastructure funding I've mentioned, transport I've mentioned, and lastly, where we're just getting to now, and again, this is an evolutionary thing for us, is starting to think about the council as a developer or a development partner. And we're just doing some work now on whether to create an urban redevelopment agency within the council. We've had bits of it before in terms of the waterfront and other places, but now we're saying we need to change the pace and the quality of these things.